I would say that if I look back on parenting, if I could redo any season of it, I would redo the first 8 years I was a mom, because I didn't really ministry and life and situations and 1,000 other podcast stories that could be told. I didn't have a good level of emotional health.
Created on purpose and for purpose.
Everybody, welcome back to the Daron Earlewine Podcast. And finally, after months and months of contract negotiations with her agent and all of the talent casting people around her, we were able to get my wife, Julie Earlewine, to join us on the podcast. Crowd goes wild. Welcome, Julie.
Hi.
Hi.
How are you?
Julie doesn't have an agent except me. And there was plenty of negotiation, but it finally worked out. Julie agreed to come.
There was not negotiation. There was force.
It wasn't force. I invited you to consider an opportunity and then scheduled it so that you would feel guilty enough that you would do it.
That's called manipulation.
No, it's called extra motivation to be on a podcast. What I knew about Julie, I know things. We've been married for 22 years. Yes.
Is it?
We've been married for 22 years. What I know is anything I ask
remember.
Julie to do, she's always going to say no to begin with. Almost constantly. Hey, you want to start a discipleship huddle? No. Fights me for 2 years, then finally does it. Greatest year of her life, give or take, right? I knew that this was going to be a great podcast series because what we're going to talk about is parenting for a purpose. And Julie and I are not parental experts. We're not like parental or marital counselors. We don't have any degrees in this, okay? What we do have is 22 years of marriage that have been pretty good, I would say. We've learned a lot about marriage, and we have 3 boys, and we've got them to 19, almost 17. By the time this podcast comes out, we're really, really close to 17, and 13 years old, 3 boys. And thus far, they're pretty awesome kids. And a lot of that is on them. Some of it, though, I would think, is on what we've done. So we've just been talking about, could we come up with a podcast series that maybe just comes up with some things, some principles, some sayings, some guidelines, some just values maybe that have guided our parenting over the past 19 years. And so a lot of this is going to be a conversation. We don't have a ton of notes because we just kind of want this to flow. We hope it works well, and we'll see where it goes. So Julie, just welcome the people to the podcast. Say hello for a second.
Hello, people. No, it is. I don't really like to do these things. It's outside of my comfort zone. I have a husband that's front and center, and I prefer not to be. But I will say that if there is something that I feel like has been probably the greatest calling that God gave me and the greatest opportunity to do was to raise my boys. So if there's a tiny little thing I did that God helped me do right, and I can share it with someone today that'll help them feel like they were a success at something in their parenting, then today's worth it.
Yeah. And Julie, we're not, like I said, we're not licensed counselors and whatever, right? I'm a pastor, sort of.
No, we pay a licensed counselor to help us.
Yeah, we have paid a licensed counselor.
Which we highly encourage.
We do. And we suggest her to all of our friends. But Julie, you professionally, one of the jobs that you do is you're a first steps therapist, and so you get a chance to go in homes and work with kids 0 to 3 years old.
Yes.
So you do see a lot of, and some of those are more on the extreme side of things, kids that may have some developmental delays, some physical disabilities and things of that nature. But you do work with kids in that way, but we have, like I said, we have raised our kids for 19 years. So we just want to walk you through some things that we say often in our house, maybe some like values and some things that we hope that maybe if you bring them into your life, they could help grow and develop your parenting. And the goal really, and the reason we called the whole series of parenting for a purpose is, I think that's what we want, and if we have kids, we want to raise our kids to discover God's purpose and plan for their life. And we can pray for that to happen, which we all do, but there's a lot of space between I pray for God to help my kids step into His purpose for their life, and then day in and day out, hour in and hour out, minute in, minute out, when your kids are little, to understand what kind of environment do we create, what kind of relationships do we build, what kind of routines do we bring into the rhythm of our home that actually can help foster this process. And so we're going to talk about that kind of stuff, see where it takes us. And, Julie, this is a kind of interesting time for us to have this conversation because we've just, no crying, we're not going to cry on this podcast, but we've just really been stepping into this really big time with our oldest son because he just left for college this summer. And we've had to, over the past year, really help him discern what is God's next step for my life. And I think that's been one of the more fulfilling but even challenging parts of parenting thus far.
Yes. I would say that's probably been, I wouldn't know that I would say it's been challenging as much as it's been like, for myself, I feel like it's been, like you feel a combination of excitement and pride and joy at the same time, and then wanting to know that they're in the right place and trusting that you've raised them to be able to make that decision themselves. So for instance, as he's walked through this journey, maybe there's something I thought he should do, and maybe there was something that Daron thought he should do. But at the end of the day, we'd raised him to trust God first and then to trust himself. And so he's had to make the decision to put himself in the position that he is in right now. And as hard as that is as a mom who likes to control and make sure that they are going to do the safest and best thing for them, it was really, really inspiring and really exciting to watch him make the choice for his own life.
Yeah. And I think one thing that Julie said there is that we've raised him to, right, and put God first, but then learn how to trust himself. And we're going to have a couple more episodes in this series. We're going to talk a little bit about what do you do when your kids are young to actually allow them to learn to trust themselves. How do you raise their kids to actually learn to think for themselves? How do you, embrace that as a parent? Because we all want to get to the place where our kid makes a great decision for their career or for their spouse or for their college. And there is a process that we can create in our families that help them do that most naturally, I guess, that they don't get to 18 or 19 years old and all of a sudden it's like, oh my gosh, this is the first freaking decision I've ever made for myself. How do I do this? I don't know how to trust myself. No one actually let me make decisions and make mistakes as I was growing up. And we'll talk about some of that. But the first thing I want to talk about, Julie, we're going to start from the beginning. And actually, before we talk about parenting, I want to talk about us as people. So here's the first episode title, if you want, okay? Is the first episode here is going to be called Apples and Trees. All right? You say, Daron, what the heck do apples and trees have to do with parenting for a purpose? Well, it's this. I think my dad said this. It looks like he stole it from Ralph Waldo Emerson, who in 1839 said this: the apple never falls far from the tree. My dad said that all the time. Julie and I have said that a ton. Oftentimes, sometimes when we see something going on in a family and you see the kid, maybe they're a little bit off the rails a little bit or something, and you just pick up about a kid, and then you meet the mom or the dad, and sometimes Julie and I will just say to herself, we'll just be like, apples and trees. You know what I mean? Apples and trees. And it's true, is that if you look at an apple tree, the apples never fall far from the tree. You know which apple goes with what tree. And this is a fortunate and unfortunate principle in life when you start having kids, right? Because we have kids, we have all these aspirations and want them to be better than us and do more than us and whatever our dreams and thoughts, and specifically probably all the things that we have not yet figured out or really grown in, our character, our personality, whatever. Of course, they'll never struggle with that. We don't want them to ever be like that. We want them to be the little perfect little Johnny and Jane there is. And then what happens is you start to realize apples never fall far from the tree. In my own personal, spiritual, mental, physical health matters absolutely foremost before we can even start talking about what I can do to or for my kid. It has to start personally, right? So here's a quick little scripture I want to throw out, and then we'll talk about this, Jules. Matthew 7, Jesus teaching on just life, but it applies in this situation. Matthew 7, verses 16 through 20. I'm reading the New Living Translation. It says this: you can identify them by their fruit, that is, by the way they act. Can you pick grapes from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? A good tree produces good fruit, and a bad tree produces bad fruit. A good tree can't produce bad fruit, and a bad tree can't produce good fruit. So every tree that does not produce good fruit is chopped down and thrown into the fire. Yes, just as you can identify a tree by its fruit, so you can identify people by their actions. You can identify people by their actions, but you can also identify a lot of times kids through their parents. And I'm not saying they're the same person. Our kids are separate from us, Jules. But we've experienced this in our life. There's been plenty of times that you and I have seen something in the boys and realized, oh yeah, like they got that one from me. Can you think of something, maybe an early situation, Jules, where you were like that, I'll own that one, like apple and tree right here?
I can think of an earlier one, but I can even just think about this morning. We were sitting at breakfast, and Knox and Daron.
No, we don't need to bring up my stuff.
I'm not. I'm getting ready to bring myself up too. But Knox and Daron have a tendency to, when they both think something's a certain way, because they have a similar response mechanism, they tend to create more tension or frustration towards the other one. So this morning they were arguing about Knox's hair. Daron was telling him he should use a blow dryer to help his hair look better.
If there's anybody that knows, let me just talk to the camera.
Knox
if there's
wasn't,
anybody that knows about how to fix hair.
Stop. Knox wasn't wanting to listen
won't
about
listen.
the hair.
He knows.
He wants
13.
to do it his way because he's 13.
He knows how to do hair at 13. He doesn't know.
So we should let him be 13. But I left and said, you're not allowed to poke at me anymore when Cole and I get into intense situations and our strengths bear into each other. And Cole and I Cole and I are awesome at when something needs to get done, we need to get a task, we see a goal, we see it, and we're like, charge forward ahead. So like this whole past year of his senior year, it was just like Mom and Cole on a trail to like, we're going to get there and get to that goal together, and we're going to get all the stuff done. Now, if you get off the rails a little bit, then both of our emotions go really high, and we have to bring in Daron, who's the peacemaker between the two of us. But I can see it sometimes in Knox and Daron that I have to come in between them two because they're going that way. And then there's Ty, our middle one, who honestly I think God was like, sweet blessing of all. We need to give them one kid that's like a Caribbean vacation. And so most of the time, Ty is the one who's helping in true middle child form. He's bringing us like kind of all back to like perspective, and he helps us all kind of like relax and take a deep breath when we're a little bit out of sorts. But I think one of the very first times I realized it is that I've always had an anxious tendency about myself. I would say that God has really done some really cool stuff in my life in the past like year, surprisingly so, where the anxiety is going down. And a lot of that has to do with like counseling and like trusting God and chiropractics and all of the reasons that I think that like my anxiety is getting better. However, I can see, I remember when Cole was about 8 or 9, some of the things he would do as an 8 or 9-year-old that I remember doing and being like, oh, I see that anxiety in him already, anxious tendencies, worry, super high achiever, never wanting to let anyone down, typical firstborn things. I'm a firstborn, so I think it helps to see the firstborn because I am the firstborn and he is, and I could see some of those things, and I can still see those anxieties now in him. And those are the ones that sometimes I'm not as sensitive to him about, which seems odd because what I tend to do is just want him to not have them so badly that I kind of get frustrated and just say, you're going to be fine, which I don't like for anyone to ever tell me I'm going to be fine.
Well, I think we see that first, right, Jules? Like you see the thing in said kid
Yes.
that is like you, and it's like you're right. I think I see the same thing. I remember with Ty, is when you see the thing about yourself
Yes.
that you're not real proud of or that causes you
And
struggle,
you don't like about yourself.
and you don't like about it, you see them in them, and I find like most of the time our initial reaction isn't always compassion.
No.
It's usually annoyance because it's like
It's the thing we don't like about ourselves.
Yeah, and it's not like we're attacking our kid, but it makes the environment tense because you're like, oh gosh, no, but I don't know how to fix this, and what do I do with this? And I want to try to control you, make you stop doing that, but part of it is like it's a part of who they are, even sometimes genetically.
Yes.
So what have you, when you see that with Cole, like what has helped you begin to start taking ownership of some of that for yourself?
Well, I think one of the things I've learned is that your kids really are like they end up being like somewhat of your greatest influence. So I think when I could see that kind of stress in him, it would make me want to lower the stress level. Because if I lower my stress level, then his stress level comes down, then Ty's comes down, then Knox's come down, and then the general stress of our home goes way down. And I realized that so much of the meter was teetering on Daron or I. Like, the emotional tenor of our home really starts at the top. And sometimes we want to think it's the kid, but really, I used to be way more abrupt and reactionary, and I realized that like abrupt and reactionary does not work well for any of them, and it doesn't work well for any of them in a totally different way for each of them. Like, in Cole, if I challenge him, it pushes him to be more frustrated. If I get real aggressive with Ty, or I'm too much to Ty, it shuts Ty down. If it's Knox that it's too much to, if any of us are too much, he's extremely sensitive. So it wears on him. So I've had to learn to take down my intensity and really like get a good baseline in our home of reactions and responses that comes out of anxiety, because it changes the tenor of their ability to manage their anxieties or their worries or their stresses.
Yeah.
So allowing my tenor to come down, and working really hard at that, because it's not easy, I think has created a really good setting in our home for us to be able to talk openly, now that they're older, about these kind of weaknesses in our lives, and then really celebrate the strengths.
Well, I love that. I remember us having that conversation years and years ago. I remember saying to you, like, Julie, you are the emotional barometer of our family.
Yeah, I think God made us that way. The heart of the home, the head of the home.
Yeah. And
he says that in the Word for a reason.
Yeah, and I think
that's where it comes from, and you have to learn
many times
to be better at
that. Would be true about the woman in the relationship. There may be some relationships where that's flipped.
Oh, absolutely.
And the man may be the
in
emotional.
our home, that's the.
But I would say that the important thing in there is to figure that out. Who is the emotional barometer of your home?
Yeah, absolutely.
And what I love that you said, babe, that I don't want people to miss is, like, you worked hard on growing and becoming more emotionally healthy yourself. Like, you got into the Word, you opened up with people, you worked on it, you know what I mean? You went to counseling, like we talked about it. Like, it was a main focus for you to say, I know I have to become a more healthy emotional tree, if you will, so that the apples, can grow the way they need to. And I think that the tough thing, and what we want to encourage you on, is that sometimes when we notice this, like in this situation, or even other ones, you notice it first in the inappropriate or undesired reactions and behaviors of your kids, right? Like, they're being this way, and what's wrong with them, and why can't they, and why are they so crazy, or why can't they? And you think you can think they're the problem. We've got to fix what's wrong with them. And you never actually stop and think and realize, wait a second, how am I contributing, or how am I modeling this kind of environment that's getting that kind of action? And that takes a ton of humility to realize, man, I've got to really grow in this. And I think that's one of the things I just want to encourage, if you're watching or listening, is if you're at that place, let's say you're thinking about having kids right now. Let's say you're not even in a serious relationship, but in your brain you think, at some point I'd like to have kids. Start now to become the most healthy version of yourself you possibly can, spiritually, mentally, physically, emotionally, all of those things. If you just got married and you and your husband or your wife are talking about, starting a family, like, that's the process. Like, yeah, save some money, build a crib, whatever, but start becoming the healthiest tree you can possibly be. If you're in there right now, maybe you're in the throes of raising toddlers, and it just feels like freaking chaos at all times. And maybe it feels overwhelming for us to say, hey, you might be the problem. But mixture of grace and truth, somebody needs to tell you this, right? And in a loving way. But it's not you might be the problem. Like, you are part of the problem. Your kids are half genetically, our kids are half Julie, half me genetically. Like, they can't not be like us, right? And then they're being raised in the environment that we're creating. And this is one thing I want to share with you, Julie, and just as an affirmation. So I reached out to a couple of moms that you have, influenced their life through the time.
You're trying to make me cry.
I'm not going to cry.
Really rude right
I'm
now.
not going
My
to use
kid
their
just moved
names.
to college.
I'm not going to use their names, so you won't even know
I'm
who it is.
probably going to know based on how close they are to me what they said.
You might, but
I'm going to know who said it.
so I reached out and I was
know
just
who
like,
you are.
"Hey, moms," I'm like, "I know Julie has had a role in your life. What's something that stands out to you that you've learned from her?" And then, so throughout some of the episodes, we'll just sprinkle these in with a little seasoning and just kind of help the moment. So one of your friends said this: "Julie has taught me that my emotional health is most important in order to serve my family and my husband. Julie gave me wings and is one of the major reasons I'm flying today." So that's something you have done.
I know who said that.
That's something that you have done in someone's life, and they saw that, and translate, like, I'm a healthier tree because Julie told me that my emotional health, mattered.
I would say that if I looked back on parenting, if I could redo any season of it, I would redo the first 8 years I was a mom, because I didn't really ministry and life and situations and 1,000 other podcast stories that could be told. I really didn't have a good level of emotional health. I wasn't like a bad person or whatever. I loved my kids. I loved our marriage. I loved our life. But I was realizing that I had not taken care. I hadn't been raised to take care of my own emotional health. And so if I could go back and be where I feel like God and my counselor and my family has helped me get to today, I'd go back and redo those first 8 or 9 years of parenting, because I think my response to my children would be different. I think my listening skills would be different. And I think just learning to allow myself space to see me for who I really am and to see others for who they really are. And in that meaning, my kids, my husband, like knowing who they are, it would have been a better first half, than it's been the second half. And so I guess if you are at that early stage of your parenting or you're thinking about it, like, it's just like you go to premarital counseling, like sometimes you need to go to pre-personal counseling as you get ready to invest in a little life, and you're the tree that's going to produce an apple that's going to then become another tree that's then going to become another apple. And so I hope that and I come from great parents, Daron comes from great parents, but with every generation, I think there's a greater opportunity to make the world and your little humans that you've been given better than we had it, or better than we were. And so that means a lot. I know who said that. Keyword wings. I know who said it.
Well, I love that you just shared that, Julie. And like I said, we want this series to be fun. We want it to be, lighthearted, but it's at the same time, it's really serious. And I love what Julie just shared, and I want to encourage you as we close this episode out, of like, to maybe spend some time getting compassionately curious of where am I right now in my spiritual, emotional, mental, physical health? And are my roots growing down deep into who God is and who He's created me to be? Am I nourishing myself so that I'm becoming the kind of tree that produces healthy apples? Am I at a place usually where I'm getting irritated that my kids are like they are, and I can't figure out what the issue is?
Let's don't act like our kids don't irritate us.
No, they irritate the crap. No, I'm saying they a lot of times, but I think what I'm saying is
we love you guys. We do,
but so often some of the things that irritate them, like you're saying, it's like you're like,
yes,
it's like I'm dealing with myself here,
yes,
right?
Very much so.
But I know and I agree with you, there were times when we were more immature and we were younger in the process. It's like you start seeing your kids as like they're the problem, or they're causing the problem. And it takes a ton of self-awareness and a ton of humility, which is everything the Holy Spirit can bring us, to stop and go, okay, how am I contributing to this? And how much is this just an apple in a tree? And if I can start right now saying, I'm gonna do everything I can to work on me, because another thing this rejects, and we'll talk about in a later episode, is rejecting the myth that other human beings can be controlled. You cannot control another human being. The only person you can control, and you don't do a very good job at it, let's be honest, is yourself. And so as you're looking to that going, I'm not going to try to make my kids or fix my kids or do this so I make them become who God wants them to be. No, what you can do is become who God's created you to be. What you can do is take control of your own health and growth and development, and then you're beginning to set an example and create an environment that can give your kids the best chance to do it. And that teases us up for what our next episode is. It's kind of in the same vein, but the next episode is going to be called more is caught than is taught. And we're going to talk about that next time. So, Julie, the first episode wasn't too bad.
We'll see when we watch it.
I tell you what, let's do 3 more.
No.
I tell you what,
kidding.
here's what we need to do. If you guys love this episode, I need you to start emailing. You know, you can email me always, Daron@blackbirdmission.com. You can hit us up on the socials, let us know what's going on. And you can always text 317-550-5070. We need a good little momentum of how much you love Julie and the podcast, because we've talked about these 4 episodes, but what I really would like us to do is 8, because I'm an Enneagram 7 and more is better. So we're shooting for 8. We'll see if we can't manipulate Julie into doing that, and it should be great. And we will talk to you guys next time on the Daron Earlewine Podcast with special guest Julie Earlewine. And remember, 3 things. God's for you, not against you. He's near you, not far away, and He's created you on purpose and for a purpose. We'll talk to you guys next time on the Daron Earlewine Podcast.